it's almost like you're up against the wall and there's a woolly mammoth, right? And you're just like, am I dying right now? Mm-hmm. Or am I fighting this thing?
Sometimes it feels like it. But, one of the phrases I love, I actually stole it from Robert Herjavec, is don't mistake my kindness for weakness. My friends that are close to me, I will absolutely support those who are close to me. But if you get in our way, I'm going to stomp on your throat. Mm-hmm. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to go home and sleep like a friggin' baby. Mm-hmm. Why? Because anytime that there's an aggression against myself, my future, or my family, or our legacy, I won't stand for it. Mm-hmm. I'll take you down, and I will absolutely not shed a single tear over it.
Yeah.
And that's not because I'm out to get people. It's actually the opposite. It's because I care so much and so deeply about the people that are close to me that I will, to the death, relentlessly fight to protect the things that are important.
Welcome today on In for the Kill. I have the one and only Evan Stewart.
That's right. Thank you for having me.
Oh, man. Dude, absolutely. I'm so glad. It was last minute, so I'm very happy that we were able to make this work out.
I am too.
And so, guys, Evan is the owner of the Be Obsessed Academy, the Obsessed podcast, host and owner, to say. And then you just went out and created this conference, which I didn't attend. But by seeing the pictures, I mean, it looked like a really fantastic event.
That's great.
I'm really sad that I actually missed it. Like,
that's okay. It only gets better. So next year it's going to be even better. So
yeah,
you're going to love it. Yeah.
Well, that's good, man. I'm glad that there's somebody who really, I think that you saw something in that event space and you were just like, I need to move forward. And by what I saw, you were really successful. It's funny because on Instagram, I heard that you were being 100 transparent with it. And you're like, I didn't make what I thought I was going to make. I even kind of lost, but I'm being transparent with it. But it's not about that. It's that you brought those people together and now they know about who you are and what you're about at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's this principle that whenever you're doing something significant, there's always two ways to look at a business transaction. You can look at the immediate revenue potential, or you can look at the length of the relationship. I don't believe in transactional business. I believe in relational business. I believe that a transaction is a byproduct of a mutually vested relationship.
Yeah.
What that means is that if you're in the business of impacting and transforming lives and businesses, then the best marketing you can have is transformed lives and businesses. Advocates, right? Yeah. You come into my life, my conference, my work, however we interact. So, we're here on your podcast, but whatever it is, and then you walk away transformed. You walk away with your business being able to transform. You become an advocate of our relationship. And so what you're referencing is the fact that we ended up losing tens of thousands on our first conference. But what happened is that 98% of the people that went, the first thing they said is, when can we come back?
Yeah.
And so it was a loss in the short term, but in the long term of the relationship, we developed advocates. So we're going to win in the long term. So our business model is, I don't care about the immediate dollar.
Yeah.
I care about the dollar of the relationship. And when you think that way, it gives you the freedom and the grace and the space and the flexibility to relax and not always go after that sale right now. Like, do I want sales? Well, yeah, I'm in business for a reason.
Yeah.
But it's also, I want to make sure that if you're a person of quality, that our relationship becomes so tightly vested that not only do we transact, but we transact often. You're excited, fascinated, and motivated to work with us. And you refer us to anyone and everyone in your life that also needs the same level of professionalism and attention to detail.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Yeah, see, what really caught my attention when I heard you say that is, for me, it hit me right away, because whenever there's an issue, people try to hide from it, especially like the embarrassment. I think the embarrassment is a big part of everything that people do. Like, did I throw a conference and was it unsuccessful? I'm going to hide it and I'm going to pretend like it wasn't.
Sure. Sure.
And when you're transparent about it, you let everybody know, like, hey, it was a great conference. Maybe it was unsuccessful in a certain way, but everybody's dying to come back.
Well, I would ask what the measurement of success is.
Exactly.
Because I wasn't trying to make money on the conference.
Yeah.
That's the thing. is I said, I'm going to spend whatever I need to spend to make this a perfect first experience. I want profit, but my expectation was to lose double what I actually lost. See, I walked away from that day going, okay, 33 G's out of my own pocket, we're okay. I have some friends that on their first conference, they've lost $500,000.
Wow.
So the fact that we were in the hole that much, but the very next day, we had $80,000 in new contracts. Then the very next day, we had another $80,000 in new contracts. And the very next day, we had another $80,000 in new contracts. So it paid for itself, but you actually touched on something which is really powerful, which is the measurement of success or failure. I don't believe in failure, I believe in feedback, but also when you release yourself of the expectation of, I must make a certain amount on this event, it is important to remain profitable. You can't run your entire business model that way. But on events like that and really specific niche experiences like that, you can take a short-term loss and still come out wildly successful. Because I tell you what, like we had talked about before we hopped on camera, we're going from 5,000 to 50,000 square feet next year.
Yeah.
And I already know that a certain percentage of sponsors and people are already booked right out of the gate, which is a guaranteed, before we sell one ticket, just from this last year and just from the sponsors, we're already profitable.
Yeah.
So, and now we're going to be profitable on a golden goose that's 10 times as large than the one we started with. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you touch on, which is super important. I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that's a concept that would be powerful for your listeners.
Yeah. And it's funny because one of the questions I had, it's like we were going to go kind of who you are and what defines you. But then I wanted to go into like why you do what you do. And you've almost already answered that for us because that's what your core values are, right? But as far as like the conference and the podcast, the Be Obsessed, the company, why are you doing all these things? What's it for?
Well, that's a great question. So my company, Obsessed Academy, we started that because we wanted to, not because we had to. And we started that because I identified in building, exiting my own companies and helping others do the same, I identified that there were these needs in the market where a lot of people teach sales and structure and all of that, but to get the right amount of information, it usually costs literally millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Or there's a significant probability you get the wrong information, which ends up costing you millions of dollars in the long run. And so what we found is that there's a certain need in the marketplace for companies that are scaling to have the right structure, to know how to properly build with an exit in mind, to actually build something that's not to where you just become a slave to self-employment, to where it actually is a real working business. I believe that every individual needs to be inspired, fascinated, and motivated by where they live, where they work, how they live and work, and who they do that with. And I recognized that in my own personal life, while I had built a really large organization, it wasn't something that, a substantial book of business in my other line of work, it wasn't something that brought me inspiration, fascination, and motivation. And I'll be candid with you, I was making some solid bread, like money's good. Yeah. And I came home angry, and I came home, I never really fell into anxiety or depression or anything like that. This is not really how I'm wired, but I would have stress and I would have anger. I would have lack of fulfillment, massive lack of fulfillment. And I looked at my life and I thought, okay, you make, millions of dollars a year, but it really doesn't matter at all when you actually hate the rest of your life. And so I sat down and I just said, something needs to change. And so I felt a calling a couple of years ago that I was needing to be moved into an area that could impact and improve the lives of other people. My personal gift is identifying the giftedness in other people and then pulling that out, equipping them with the structure that allows them to live in alignment with that giftedness and strength instead of defaulting to their weaknesses. It's organizationally, how do we streamline, shorten sales cycles, increase process efficiency, work with executive teams to make sure the mission is uniform throughout. But then from a personal side, I do a lot of personal work with high-level influencers and professional athletes and people in that space on, okay, you've got something to say. How do we extract it? And I wasn't able to do that. And so the reason why I do this now is because I believe that you have a moral and an ethical responsibility to bless the world with your gift if you've identified it and you know how to use it. And since I had those things, I was starting to violate my ethical commitment to other people by not living in alignment with that. And so we just got up and said, all right, we're done. We moved to sell. I exited, and we started this.
Yeah.
And now we're here.
Yeah. So with the word obsessed, I feel that there must have been a reason that you had that word, and it must be because that's the way your life is really led. Mm-hmm. There's certain things that people say over and over again or think over and over again, and once you finally find that word or that mentality, you can't seem to let it go. Mm-hmm. How early did that go? What's the earliest memory you have of you being just obsessive?
Well, it's gone all the way back to my childhood. It's just, as early as my childhood can go, it's gone back. It's just, I didn't define it as obsession. I defined it as just being really intensely driven to do one thing. Mm-hmm. And figure things out too. And so for me, it was when I was really, really young. In fact, I was so young, I remember I had to pull myself up on a piano seat just to sit on the piano seat, because my first obsession was music.
Okay.
And so people don't necessarily know this, but I'm a classically trained concert pianist. My specialty was Chopin and Rachmaninoff. So I performed some really, really large pieces later in my life, but when I was really, really young, I found a fascination with just piano and music and bringing that out. And so I remember distinctly, I had pulled myself up into the seat, I'm sitting on the seat, and there's a storm outside, and I'm listening to it. And I'm hearing the crack of thunder, and I'm seeing the flash of lightning. And I remember calling to my mom, who was making dinner in the kitchen at the time, just a couple rooms over. And I would play at the top and do a little bit of sparkle, at the top of the keys and light. And then it would wait, and then the thunder would happen. And then I'd go all the way down to the bottom, put my hands like this, and just hit the bottom of the keys. And I spent, days and days and days and days trying to work out this sound of how I could take what I was seeing and turn it into sound. And I just became obsessed with bringing a structure back to the ambiguity that I had found outside, and kind of the magnificence of what I was experiencing, which is just a storm. But when you're a kid, everything's extravagant and really beautiful. So ever since I was young, and then throughout now, my entire life has been, how do I go deep, find a solution, and then bring that back into a way that can impact the world?
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful mind that you have, and speaking with so many different people who really expand and explore their gifts, you find that everybody is so different and so talented.
Yeah.
But it's incredible the way your mind works. I've never heard anybody say that they were trying to play to the weather. Mm. And when you really hear it, you're like, this is incredible. Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's something that you would never think to do. Mm-hmm. So truly, it's crazy. But us being different human beings, everybody becomes obsessed with different things, right?
That's right.
And when I talk about obsessed, I don't necessarily talk about the bad obsessions, because obviously there's the good and the bad.
Sure.
I always try to refer to them as the good ones, right? What do you think is what is that determining factor that leads somebody to say, this is what my obsession is?
So are you asking about how you define or how you find an obsession, or are you asking about a healthy versus an unhealthy obsession?
No, how do you find what's yours?
Got it. Okay. So what I would recommend, and it's funny you bring this up because I actually talked about this yesterday on a show I was on, this phrase, you might have heard it because I know you've engaged with my content, but threads of consistency. Mm-hmm. And a thread of consistency is these moments in your life where you inadvertently touch your gift, even if you don't recognize it. A thread of consistency might be where you, the one I spoke to yesterday was maybe you have a gift to speak strength into other people. Mm-hmm. And the thread of consistency will be some reason, somehow, people always turn to you when they're in emotional stress, or when you're young and there's problems in a relationship. They always go to you like, man, Ruben, let me tell you about. Yeah. And then when you're older, maybe it's you're drawn when you're going through school, maybe you're in high school, maybe you decide to go to college and you're drawn to the classes that are therapeutic, and they break into family dynamics and people dynamics and psychology over the mathematics. You're constantly being drawn back into your giftedness just through the things that excite, fascinate, and motivate you. And so if one of your listeners is listening or watching, what I encourage is to think back on your life and think to where a thread of consistency might lie. So what are the things you keep going back to conceptually? So maybe it's, for some reason, right, this is how it starts. For some reason, everybody comes to me when they're in distress. For some reason, I'm just really good at whatever it is. You don't have to be humble here. Sometimes you can say, man, I am really good at this. I'm the best in the world at this. Well, whatever that is, you start to think of the concept around it. So my thread of consistency, and the reason that I was able to pull out and define my gift of helping others find theirs, is because whenever somebody had uncertainty, ambiguity, needed clarity, I was the person they would turn to. When it was, I need to figure out how to say this. How do I word this? It could be simple things at work. Hey, Evan, can you help me craft this email? Simple things like that. But I started to recognize, what are we doing? We're defining other people's voices, defining their voice around a gift and an objective and a mission. So starting with that concept of threads of consistency is massive. And if you're having trouble even defining that, go back a step further and think, throughout your life, what are the things that have been inspiring, fascinating, and motivating? What are those things conceptually? Not, I love riding my bike, but what is it about riding your bike? That type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's how you can start, in my opinion, to define your gift and then define your obsession.
Yeah. I got to come back to this, and I will, right? The way that you word things is absolutely beautiful. Okay. And I think you have a gift with speech and being able to fluidly speak as well, and just connect things in your head so that your mouth repeats almost exactly what your head is thinking.
I hope so. Sometimes I listen back and think, wait a minute.
Well, I mean, everybody has their problems, right? And as I go back through like my own things, I'm like, man, I said a lot of like, you know?
Yeah. But that's the beauty of content, is you have an opportunity to go back and see. My problem isn't that things are spoken incorrectly. It's that I think so quickly. Sometimes I stumble over my words. So I have to actually slow down a little bit, or I get really excited and I think, wow, I said that really quickly.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of the content, like what you're doing here, is every single time there's an opportunity for you to force yourself to watch and then grow. And that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. I wanted to touch up on the obsessed factor again. When people start getting this obsessed, when people start really going after their goals and pinpointing them, like just sheer focus on that one thing, they start seeing that successful people have all these things. Successful people, maybe it's not even just the wealth and the money, but they have the respect and they have all these things that kind of are uplifting, and people start thinking, man, I want that.
Sure.
And as you know, like once you start really going after everything, there are these moments that become crushing moments where you have to face pressure. And if you go past those moments, then you become the person who is ready to take on success.
Yes.
Right? What crushing moment do you remember that really, really forced you to become something more?
That's a good question, because I've had a few.
Yeah.
I think, I had businesses that I had lost, businesses that had succeeded, but it wasn't, even in the loss of a business, it was just kind of a growing experience because my mind is always on the future. For me, the first moment where things really came down, there were two in particular, and they're in about 3 years apart. But the first one was when I built my first real estate company. And within about 9 months, we built it up to about an $11 million book of business, which at the time I thought was just mind-blowing, right? And I can't even imagine all this. But anyway, and I had built up, realistically, I had built it up. My business partners were unengaged and uninspired, and they would show up at 11, take lunch at noon, leave at 3 type of thing. Yeah. And while I was there, sun up to sundown, trying to make it work, make it happen. And one day, I'm thinking I've got it all. I've got started a little bit of money coming in the bank. I had dropped out of school, so I'm like, I have to prove that I'm not full of crap. And one day, the 3 other people on the board, because I didn't have the total voting rights, mistake number 1, which I'll never make again, they sat down and said, hey, you know what? We thank you so much for all your hard work. What we're going to do is we're going to fire you from your position. We're going to keep you on just as a basic agent, not any type of management or executive position, which is what I had. We're going to keep you on as a basic agent, and if you sign a contract in our favor for basically I give them the majority of the income that I earn, then we'll give you an opportunity for a certain amount of years. We'll give you an opportunity to buy a franchise when we franchise your business model in 5 or 10 years. Yeah. And so I got in the car and broke down, called my dad, and called my attorney, and we worked things out real quick because you can't do that in a company. So walked away from that situation, from this big, just flirting with 8 figures book of business. And after attorney's fees, I had like $9,300 in my account, which is, it's still $9,000, but it's not, it's not anything when I came home to an apartment with a futon. I hadn't even bought furniture yet. It was a 900 square foot apartment it had like one futon and two little folding chairs from Target, the kind of little.
Oh yeah.
And I was just crushed. And so that was the first moment for me where two things happened. One, I'm a person of faith, so I immediately turned to God and just said, okay, if you're going to direct my life, then I need to make sure that I'm constantly living in the obedience of where your calling is moving me. And I live, that's my number one rule right now is God moves first, because I refuse to live out of alignment for what his calling is in my life. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing was, I've got to rebuild, and I've got to rebuild quickly. And so that was the first real crushing moment. And then the rebuilding process was hard. The second was when I was in the process of rebuilding, and I was trying to make things work. I was coming off of where things had been working, and I was trying to make things work. And I remember the day, it was a couple years later, and it had some wins and whatnot, but nothing was consistent. And I was sitting in a car that I didn't like, an old car. Yeah. I actually bought it from my grandparents when they got a new one. And I was sitting in this old car, and it was in a Target parking lot, and not a super great part of town, at like 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night on like a Wednesday or something like that, trying to figure out how I could afford to buy food, and couldn't make my $800 a month apartment payment. That was coming up too. And I broke down, and I just started just praying and really was just thinking aloud, thinking in prayer, thinking in anger, just what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
And both of those times were great because they brought me down to a point that was so low that I had to completely force myself to align again with what I believed the calling and obedience was that I needed to stay accustomed to, and then at the same time really work back in my strengths, gifts now as we're calling them, and rebuild. And so that was it was a hard time, but I'm very, very glad I went through it. Even this year we had some other intense struggles, which I'll talk about probably in 2020. But very glad I went through it, but boy, do I never want to go through that again.
Yeah. See, the reason I brought it up is because the whole podcast, I like to really, really bring it back to what it is, and it's in for the kill, right? And it's modern day hunters, and I believe you're a modern day hunter. And when you get crushed, it's almost like you're up against the wall and there's a woolly mammoth, right? And you're just like, am I dying right now? Or am I fighting this thing?
Sometimes it feels like it. But, one of the phrases I love, I actually stole it from Robert Herjavec, is don't mistake my kindness for weakness. My friends that are close to me, I will absolutely support those who are close to me. But if you get in our way, I'm going to stomp on your throat. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to go home and sleep like a friggin' baby. Why? Because anytime that there's an aggression against myself, my future, or my family, or our legacy, I won't stand for it. I'll take you down, and I will absolutely not shed a single tear over it.
Yeah.
And that's not because I'm out to get people. It's actually the opposite. It's because I care so much and so deeply about the people that are close to me that I will, to the death, relentlessly fight to protect the things that are important.
Protect them, yeah.
And that's a really important distinction, is because what you're talking about modern day hunters and killers, a lot of people think that it's just like, oh, I'm going to get up and we're going to hustle. But that's not it all the time. It's usually those, because I know a lot of people that no one knows their name, but boy, are they successful. And boy, are they killers. Because for every person that's on Instagram that's flexing, there's 100 other people, and you have no idea who their name is, but they still got 30 car garages stuffed to the brim, And they're quiet. They're wonderful, genuine people. But I tell you what, the real modern day hunter that I've seen that succeeded is the one that observes, that has a peaceful awareness, but the minute there's an aggression, they stomp it out, right? The fire gets up on this couch right now. We're not just going to sit and be like, oh shit, there's a fire. No, we're going to immediately stomp it out.
Yeah.
And so I think when I hear of your phrase and your content and what you're pushing about this modern day hunter, what I see, because think about the hunting process, it starts with silence and observation.
Yes.
Not Instagram and grit and hustle. It starts with silence and observation, because the modern hunter is going to sit and observe and listen and smell and be at peace for that moment until he identifies or she identifies what must be executed on, and then immediately they execute, right? so many people, I believe, have this flip narrative of, oh, I'm the hunter, I'm going to make the kill. Like, all right, and that's not what it is. Because if you're actually hunting and you go out and you start shouting, everything runs away. I don't believe in chasing, I believe in attracting. You're going to attract positive and you're going to attract negative. But regardless, when it comes to you, you have a peaceful awareness to be able to identify and move in a much more frictionless manner. So I think I like the concept. I do. I believe in it.
Yeah. Now that we're talking about like big things and big people, right? When I started thinking like obsessed and more like on the historical side of people, who were these people that really made changes that we remember. And the first two people that come into my head, those are the ones that I'm going to write down. Right. Okay. And the ones that I wrote down were Martin Luther King and Alexander the Great. Do you identify with one of those more than the other?
I really like Martin Luther King. Alexander the Great, I don't know enough about. I just don't know enough depth to truly build an identification. Gotcha. The reason I like Martin Luther King is because he was a prime example of that kind of peaceful, because he was a killer, man. He was a killer. He was an absolute stone cold killer. Like, you get in his way, but see, it was, again, he's not raining down with bullets, he's raining down with peace. And I think that's what I like about my concept of healthy obsession and why I kind of identify with it: the emotion, the mindset, and the discipline. The stage of revelation, preparation, and cultivation is you can have a peacefulness about you, and you can move in grace, you can move in love, you can move in compassion, and you can move in kindness without shedding any of those killer instincts. And that's why I like that you brought up the fact that Martin Luther King is one of those people for you, is because I believe that he embodied moving in grace and space and kindness and compassion and forgiveness, and yet he was still a killer. And I think that narrative, like I mentioned before, it really is lost. And a lot of people, it actually, if that's, someone's listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, that's kind of how I move, really is a massive, massive, massive value to you to be underrated. Yeah. I love it when I walk into the room, they think, oh, it's just some screw-off kid. And then they get up on stage in front of 5,000 people, and now all of a sudden they have a different perspective. It's so powerful to be underestimated. Yeah. And Martin Luther, he was underestimated for a very long time.
For sure.
And then his actions spoke before him. So when he came into the room, his presence was elevated because he moved with the intensity of that killer instead of the intensity of being loud.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to end with just one more question.
No, of course.
Everybody that moves in these these big ways, they do it, for their own reasons to try to help people. But at the end of the day, you want some sort of a legacy, and the legacy isn't necessarily something that you're going after, but it's something that you leave more than anything, right?
Right.
Because if you go after it, you're pushing too hard to try to get it. But when you do things and then you eventually, it catches up with you, right?
Right.
So with that, like, what is it that you want people to say when you're gone? What would be the perfect thing that you would think, like, man, if somebody were to just say Evan Stewart was, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I both have an answer and am developing the answer and don't want it to be Evan Stewart is, because the thing about a person is like a fruit. Once the fruit is plucked, it immediately starts dying. So once, you can have a grandiose life, but the problem is that the person is never the power or the point of change. It's always what they're able to accomplish with their gift. And so the phrasing of that, let's talk about Evan Stewart. I don't necessarily care if people talk about me. My ego doesn't live past the grave, right? So I don't care if people are going to be talking about me. What I care to do is to use my gifts, the resources we have at Obsessed Academy, the momentum we have, the calling I believe God's placed in our life, and the hand and the obedience with that mission, to be a catalyst for inspired individuals to go and make massive impacts and significant change in their own worlds. My goal is that when I finally die, A, my company lives on past me. That's a massive goal. B, that there are people in my environment, whether it's employees or family or other people that I'll meet down the line, that are able to carry that movement moving forward. Because building a life you can be obsessed about is not Evan Stewart. It can be you. It can be anybody else, anybody that's watching, anybody that's listening. They can immediately adopt that and start living that. So my goal is, how do we, through our gifts, become such a catalyst for change makers in their own right that they start like droplets in the water. It's like a pebble. You throw it in, it makes a little ripple, but then it dies.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm that pebble now. But what if we get 1,000 people all around this pond, and everyone's throwing in, the water's never quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we create such a massive disruption that when Evan Stewart dies, I'm just a part of the larger picture and the larger story, which is humanity that's living in alignment with a giftedness and a calling and an obedience, a peace and a grace and a space and a consciousness and awareness, as opposed to defaulting to stress and anxiety, to what other people think and what their environment is constructed as. That's really my big goal, and what I am working towards so heavily here. Not so much about me, because I lost the ego when I lost my first companies, and I learned real quick that doesn't go too far. My third principle is unity, is collaborate without ego. But more so that if we're here for a specific reason, how does the reason live longer than the name? Because my belief is that if my identity as Evan Stewart is the name, Martin Luther King, what do you immediately think of without thinking of the man? What's the next thing that comes to your mind?
The movement.
Exactly. See, what happens is that Martin Luther King becomes a catalyst for his movement. You see, people can connect with the movement, which is still going very about equality and about people getting an absolute right to live their best life without friction, without being oppressed, right? Freedom of speech and of life and of marriage, and all of that is still moving on, right? He was just a catalyst for that. But you can connect with the movement without even knowing he exists. I guarantee you there are people that are connecting with the facets of the movement that don't recognize that his pebble was the one that launched, that created that ripple effect.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm here to do, is to be that catalyst, not to be the namesake to where it all ends with the name Evan Stewart.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
We ended with the same question of why is Evan Stewart, and I think you kind of brought it all back into a nice, neat package with that. And what's funny, I forgot to ask you, the main reason that I asked this question is because once we started, you said consistency thread, right? That was your term. And I was watching another video, and you said, hey, look, I'd rather follow my own sword and die by my own sword if I need to. And those are such memorable things that I'm like, that people are going to be talking about you when you're dead, one way or another. Like I said it before, you have a gift with like wording and with flow of speech to where you're going to say things that are so memorable that the movement will be part of your legacy, but so will be the things that you said that stuck with people and in their hearts too.
And I appreciate that. And, if I don't have a problem if people talk about me. I think, like you had talked about, I want it to be in relation to the bigger picture and not just let's talk about this person. I don't mean to crap on anybody, so I'm not going to name specific names. But if you think of maybe a celebrity, you might think of a movie or this or of that, but so much of the conversation revolves around their identity.
Yes.
Not one or the other, but we can pluck a few, right? And so much of the conversation revolves around that identity that when they die, everything else kind of dies with it, right? And then we go back to your example of like Martin Luther King. Well, that identity, it's like, boom, it opens up this whole world of conversation.
Yeah.
That's the type of legacy I want to. You can talk about me, I don't care, sure, but it needs to lead to something greater than myself or I failed.
Sure.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool, man. That's been the episode. Before we end, is there anything that you would like to talk about, a shout out to a specific person or anything that's on your mind?
Honestly, I'm grateful that we were able to make this work. Grateful to your audience for listening, for watching. My goal is that you got value, of course. I always want to bring value. And I guess the only thing is that if you've enjoyed this content, give my man a review and a 5-star review and a rating on iTunes. And then, of course, give me a follow. I'm on social at Real Evan Stewart. And you can get engaged with my content, with the podcast, and hopefully start building your own life you can be obsessed about through a more tangible and actionable solution instead of just, hey, be better, because that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. we're gonna add all your stuff on the YouTube channel and Spotify as well. So
awesome.
If everybody really, he's interviewed some great people, and his style of interviewing is just amazing. So you really should give it a shot. Evan, thank you again for everything that you've done. Thank you for being with me, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.